Hello everybody, this is Fernando for the latest Ghosts and Spirits video. Thank you everyone for your patience on this series. I was going to start it last week again based on your suggestions, but I took a little trip recently and I just got back the other day. So now I'm getting back into the groove of making these videos here on your suggestions. I'll probably do maybe about 3 or 4 this go around, so be on the lookout for them later on. This one was quite fascinating because it's one of those stories where there have been multitude of people stating that they have encountered this particular ghost. That's what makes it so fascinating, because when you have just a few witnesses, you can kind of throw it to the side. But when you have story after story that people are telling online about their encounter with this particular ghost, and then on top of that, having it happen at one very specific location that time and time again people visit. It's a tourist location of sorts. People go visit it and they continuously run into this ghost. Then you can't really put it aside. It's one of those things where it makes you scratch your head and realize, if you ever go there, then you'll have a high chance of encountering it too. And I'm talking about the ghost known as the ghost of Joe Bush, which you're looking at a purported picture of here. Quite a freaky looking thing, isn't it, when it comes to this ghost? This is a ghost that has been haunting this location, a location that's called the Sumter Valley Gold Dredge in Oregon, for quite a number of years. So I'm going to go ahead and go over the history real quick of the dredge first, and then tell you how it ties in with the ghost of Joe Bush. So what is this particular ghost? Again, the history first starts off with the Gold Dredge, which you're looking at here, the Sumter Valley Gold Dredge. What's interesting is that in Oregon, that location there in Sumter, gold was first discovered apparently in the mid 1800s, but for whatever reason, because normally you would have a gold rush of sorts immediately thereafter, but for whatever reason, gold and the people coming to mine them didn't really start until the early 1900s, so about a good 50 years later or so. And when that happened, in that area, 3 dredges of sorts were built, which you're looking at the pictures of here. So these dredges were being used for quite a little period, not too long, I guess, until you could say the gold ran out, and it was about 20 years or so. So from about 1912 to 1934, these dredges were used. What's curious though is that there's 3 dredges, but apparently they were called different numbers, and the one that Joe Bush seems to haunt is the one that's called number 42, which I believe is this picture that you're looking at here. So this is how the story of Joe Bush occurs. It's a little confusing because I tried to find out 100% if he was involved with the dredge from the beginning, or if he was already there beforehand and the dredge was just built on top of, I guess, his haunted location. It seems to be that's the case, because whenever the dredges were built and then later operated, these dredges were operated day in, day out, 24 hours a day, all that time during those 20 years or so. And the way it worked was there were always 3-man crews that were making sure, I'm sorry, not 3-man crews, but 3-tiered crews that were making sure that they would have this thing running 24 hours a day. And there was a very fascinating article I found on BakerCityHerald.com that pretty much described the quintessential Joe Bush experience. The way that one of the miners there who worked there stated how things went, he said that during most of the day, when the thing was running and there were a lot of people, a lot of workers, a lot of miners going around the place, they didn't see or hear or experience anything. But it was always at night that they would have a continued, I guess almost like a scheduled experience of sorts with Joe Bush. Because what would happen is, inevitably, when all of a sudden the machines would shut down, like there would be a complete loss of power. And when that happened, it was always at the dead of night. And so whenever that occurred, then the power had to be restarted. It would take a little while, and most of the workers would have to go to one location to get the power up and running. That always left one other worker back behind on the dredge, and then that's when that worker would stay that yes, they always had an encounter with this ghost of Joe Bush. That's the way he described it. This guy, a guy by the name of Wes Dickinson, stated that he worked on the dredge for about 4 years in the late 1940s, and he said every time in the dark of night, that's when the power went out, the lights extinguished, the way he described it, the pump stopped, and then there was absolute complete silence. So he was the one that was generally left behind. And then when he wasn't left behind, there were others that were left behind. I guess it just depended on the rotation. And when that happened, that's when he described it as suddenly turning into a scary place, because the way he would describe it is Dickinson would sit on the boat, get back in some corner, and stay there, and then quote unquote wait for Joe Bush. That's apparently how Joe Bush operated. Anytime, whenever he stopped or was able to stop the dredge from operating, then when he knew someone was by themselves, that's when Joe Bush, the ghost, would come out. Nothing really scary in terms of, I guess, like the ghost of Joe Bush terrorizing or purposely damaging people or harming them. And it seems like instead this ghost would just come out, want to be noticed, and make sure that it would leave its presence known. This could be described as having the most common thing is wet, bare footprints, apparently left on the dredge's decks, obviously when no one was there, so that way people would know that it was him. Other times, apparently, the ghost of Joe Bush would cause lights to flicker on and off, again after the power has already been turned off, but he would manage to somehow quickly turn them back on and off in a way that you know somebody is manipulating things. And then on a more physical presence, either A, having doors open and close, obviously when no one is there, so that way you can know 100% that the ghost is definitely doing this, or B, making his presence full known altogether, like making his physical presence seen in front of whoever that poor worker was that was left behind. That's what tourists that go there to this day, because it has become a historical site, state as well. I was reading some of the comments from some of the tourists, and they said absolutely the ghost of Joe Bush is real. They have seen him, they have felt him, they've seen the full apparition of him as well, just standing there, just looking at him and then disappearing. Others have apparently also heard the doors closing somehow, I guess on the dredge nearby too. Again, when nobody is there, so that way they can make sure that he knows their presence is there. Now, as far as speculation as to what or who the identity of this ghost is, as I said in the beginning, it's a little confusing because there's certain stories that make it seem like Joe Bush was, I guess, a worker during the days of the dredge when it was in operations, and then other stories that make it seem like the ghost of Joe Bush was instead something that was already there beforehand, but then the dredge was built on top of it, and then that's why this thing haunts that location. If you go with that angle, that let's say he was someone that worked there, then apparently Joe Bush was a mechanic that used to work at the number 42 dredge, but he was under a different name. I guess he was trying to hide his identity, and so that's why he went under that name of something different than Joe Bush. And then when that happened, somehow, some way, he died on the dredge, either by some accident or something else different, and then he decided to haunt that location. So that's one angle. Another angle is that there was a guy, an oiler by the name of Chris Rowe, who maintained, apparently, he was like a mechanic, an oiler, I don't know what it was, but he was someone that worked on the number 1 dredge, and this was in the earliest days, like 1918 or so. He also suffered an accident. He was crushed within one of the gears, but when that happened, then his essence, his ghost, his spirit, whatever you may call it, traveled with that gear to the number 3 dredge, because apparently those parts that were used within those gears were transferred from one of the dredges to the other. His essence, his spirit was transferred as well, and that's why it haunts this location true. And then, of course, there's the other angle that whatever was there before. And then with regards to people encountering it, it's only because the dredge was built on top of that haunted location. And then that's when this ghost, how it got the name Joe Bush, I have no idea. But this ghost still haunts it to this day, because people still travel to that location. So if you're ever in the spirit, no pun intended, and you wanted to go ahead and try to find a hugely reported known location for a particular ghost, then check out this one, the ghost of Joe Bush, again there in the Sumter Valley Gold Dredge in Sumter, Oregon. If you go there, then especially, I guess, I don't know if they have tours at night, but if they do, then you'll have a highly successful chance of experiencing, witnessing something involving this ghost. So quite fascinating stuff. I love reading about these things whenever you have something like this where there's a known location with known apparition of sorts, and it's consistent. Like, you'll know 100% that this thing is going to be there. So has anyone had any experience with this ghost, the ghost of Joe Bush? Any other information that I might have missed out on, that'd be great to hear too. So alright, everybody, thanks again as always. Take care.